It's 2 minutes past 9. I obviously have not had my coffee. Hello everyone. Let's start this day with a Karakia by Councillor Wharehinga.
Mōre nei te whānau me noi tātou. E o ngā mano tēnei te whakamoi mātātou ki a koe mo tēnei huhui ngā mātou. Ara hena mai ki au ki te tika ki te pono e mātou. Tukoa mai te wairua tapu hei manaki hei awhi hei tiaki ko ki a mātou. Nei mātou e tūhu nei mui tāroa ka tuku I tēnei inoi I rongi I te ngoto mātou kai whakorei. Kreiti, Amen.
Amen. For that. Okay, let's get cracking. Welcome to our finance and performance meeting. Even though the agenda is huge, it is not going to be a long meeting. Famous last words. Apologies. I have an apology. Councillor Ria is sick. Anyone else? No, I'm happy to move Councillor Ria's apology, seconded by Councillor Wharehinga. All in favour? Aye. Already carried. Any declarations of interest? So councillors, even if you forget to do it now, if we then get to a paper where you realise, oi, I might have a conflict, please bring it up. It needs to be noted. It is very, very important. It's not a courtesy. It is a legal requirement that you do let us know if you have a clear conflict of interest. Okay, let's go to page 5 and take a look at our minutes. Those were sent out by Dee quite a while back. And I want to reiterate what Councillor Telfer said 2 meetings ago. If you have issues or have questions of clarity or you want something added or clarified, please reply to that email that everyone sees it well in advance. So then when we come here, it's just a process. So those minutes are passed and I sign it and it goes into the archives. Ka pai? Aye. Any questions around our minutes? Moved by Councillor Gregory, seconded by Councillor Foster. Thank you. All in favour? Contrary, carried. Okay. Let's take a look at the updates that were given. So there's an update on page 10. If you go to our action register, you will see that Fiona on the 4th of February added a comment there in regards to a question that Councillor Tibble asked. Any more questions or queries? All good? Okay. So I am going to change the agenda today because I want us to give our best energy. Page 117, councillors. Because I do know what happens with draft fees and charges. I am going to take us straight to page 117 so we can take a look at our draft annual plan. I want to open the floor and say, Pauline, Kapai. This is a plan written very clear. We know exactly what we're doing. You have highlighted the minor changes that is in regards to the 3-year plan we had. It is really, really straightforward. I think it is a plan that we can be really proud of. And I'm going to hand over to you Pauline, just to Nadine, to highlight a few areas, and then I'm going to open the floor to councillors.
Thank you, Your Worship, and just a few key things because you've got a really good summary in terms of the executive summary for you that highlights the key points, but just a reminder in terms of our 3-year recovery plan that we set, we put the rates cap was at 11.4%. This year is under that at 9.94%. So we've got an increase of a very, very, very small increase of about 0.2% rates increase this year. So it is on par with what you had planned for in year 2 in your 3-year recovery plan. There are no major variances to this. Primarily, there is you might see that there is a bit of an increase in the debt. That's a $4 million pothole roading budget increase and slightly operational expenditure slightly up from wastewater depreciation and additional project management costs for recovery, which will be recouped. The other things just to note is that we are running within all our benchmarks and our financial strategy that we have put out through our 3-year plan recovery, and that I agree that the team has done a fantastic work pulling it together.
Good. Councillors, any questions or queries? The paper is really straightforward, highlight exactly what the changes are, why they happened, and how we move forward. Councillor Foster, you have a question.
Yeah, thank you. On page 138.
138, councillor.
We've got our community facility. We've got a chart there of our population and all that. But in our population by location, it's got urban living in Gisborne 23% and rural and townships 13%. I would have thought our urban living was way higher than 23%.
I'll check on that. That might be a transpose on the first figure. It might be the 50 or 60, but I'll check on that.
Thank you for that, Councillor Foster.
Thank you.
And also, councillors, if there are any minor stuff, this is not minor, thank you, Councillor Foster, but any typos or stuff like that you pick up in reports like this, everyone's just human. Just click an email through and highlight that to Pauline.
So I did have a query on page 167.
167, councillors.
We are running a surplus of $90 million. And annual plan forecast a net surplus of 90. It's on the net surplus of $90 million, up 1.5. Why do we run such a huge surplus? Why are we targeting such a huge surplus? I mean, is that because I tried to explain about the grants and the tax implications and everything, but I'm just not quite sure why we're running a huge surplus.
Thank you, Pauline.
So I will take you, I think, page, the refers to it is on page, the prospective statements. So on
what page?
Page 170.
170.
170, councillors, on the prospective statements. Take a look there.
Yeah. So effectively, where it says net surplus deficit after taxation, which is the second line from the bottom. Okay?
82 million.
And basically you can see we've got 251 million in revenue, but we've got expenditure which is 162. The difference between those two is the capital grants. The capital grants, as it's noted in there, is recorded as revenue, but the expenditure is not recorded under the expenses, and so therefore you get a surplus. There's not as the expenses is not matching the revenue. That surplus goes to reduce what we have to do from borrow from the banks. So effectively, it is basically just because an accounting recognition says all your grants, all your revenue that you receive, but you're not going to recognise all the costs in there, it's going to be in the expenditure. So that's predominantly the rationale for the surplus.
So, Councillor Foster, and that lines up with page 119, where we have our recommendation, where we do say, we note we have an accounting surplus, but it is only an accounting surplus. Okay? Any more questions or queries? Councillor Older.
I've got a few, surprisingly.
Give us the page and then we go there.
So starting on page 170.
170.
Actually, no, sorry, I have to go back.
No rush.
Starting on page 120. And this formula that we're using to stay under the 175% of our debt. Our debt has to be no more than 175% of our revenue. So the first question, is this a central government decree? Can you just remind us how that formula comes about?
We borrow, it is both, but our borrowers, external borrowers, is a local government funding agency. And from that, if we're not credit rated, and we're not, and the maximum amount that we can borrow is 175% of our revenue. So debt to that is the ratio, is what we can borrow up to. It's a bit like your credit card max.
Because if you credit rating, you can do 250.
That
Yes.
175% is a figure not dreamt up by us, it's a decree.
Yes. Yeah.
Right. So, and our income is made up of small private rates and largely government money, which we have no control over. And so, isn't it a concern that our revenue is so reliant on top-ups from central government? And wouldn't it be more prudent to set this formula more tied in with our absolute revenue, which is our rates? We could have the tap turned off on us tomorrow, and we're going to be left high and dry with a 175% formula.
And through your worship, and it is, so any one-off injections of funding aren't counted in our income. So it is around surety of income.
Yep, no, I realise that. And it's hard to figure out, and it's going to be one of my other comments in...
Councillor Alder, while you look for that, wasn't it in the past our income would be 60% rates? When we didn't have these events and we don't get such a huge injection from the government because we're doing work that they pay us to do, then our rates would make a bigger chunk of the smaller piece of work we are doing. So that is reflecting the huge amount of work we are doing extra, is that government injection. When there's not that extra cyclone type stuff, the percentage of rates definitely goes up. Yeah.
So, you know, I've been looking through, I can see where the rate income is. It's very hard to see where the formularised part of government revenue is in our accounts. And it would be quite nice if it was highlighted and we can actually monitor it. So this is where that money's going, how likely is it to be turned off on us? You see what I'm saying? I'm probably not explaining it, but to me it seems pretty risky that there's a huge chunk of our income.
But can I counter that with my thoughts, and then I'm not trying to, what you're saying is 100% true, but we getting a huge chunk of money to do work that we wouldn't usually do.
I realise that.
So if we don't have that, we don't need that money. So then we work with the money we have. So in future, if we don't have an event or need injections from government, we would have, and we would work absolutely within what we have because we would have less work to do.
Look, I'll put the emergency money aside, I'm not talking about that. Just general government money, which is fickle. It goes up and down with change of government. And it's still something that we have no control over.
Well, there are some that we've got, so, and Pauline will probably explain it a bit better, but there is a base that we know that, you know, we've subsidies from NZTA, that distribution that you take into account. So we might have a base of about $80 million worth of income that makes up that we're looking at the 175% of debt. Now our income for the year is something like 200 million. So you see that we haven't 250 million. So you see that we haven't accounted for everything when we're looking at that debt. So it is about 80 odd million that we're looking at in 175%, which takes into account probably more secure income like from government grants and subsidies.
Yeah. So that brings me to page 170, where all our grants are itemised. I think it would be nice to be able to see which of those grants are part of this formula.
So, as the Chief Executive has pointed out, if you were doing the straight formula as a kind of a check with it, I'm just going to give you two things. That's at reasonableness. If you've got 250 odd million, you would expect to borrow up to 400 odd million, and we haven't. So we're nowhere near that. What we have and what your degree of assurance is saying, as opposed to I want to check how you calculated that, is on page 191. And on 191 is our benchmarks that we actually say how are we doing, what are we doing it against, and how we actually compare to what we said in the 3-year plan, what are we doing, and we have to record this separately as your benchmark graphs and comparatives at the annual report. So in that particular ones, it says a debt affordability quantified limit is going to be less than 175 and says that we're at 155. So that's your degree of assurance, that's audited, that's where you see. those kind of things. But if you were looking at a high level, quite right, if you were taking 255 million, we expect us to be 400 million, and we know that our debt projected for that is a lot. So that's where you get the other kind of degree of insurances that these marry up.
But would I be asking too much to actually see where those figures are rather than see?
It wouldn't be in the annual report because that's very detailed, but in terms of what we calculate and that information, I'm certain, yep, not a problem. It's but basically, as our chief executive said, she's spot on. You look at the NZTA share for the BAU on our roads, and that is a given. Of that 68, you look at that level. If it's 34 million, you take that into account because that's assured. You look at your rates revenue and anything else that maybe is a long-term enduring things. Everything else is separated.
Another question, Councillor?
Yeah, well, just generally, I guess on page 173, that our interest is, I've figured it out at 9% of our rates, and further on was it at 7%. I just don't know what that number was, but I'm using a different figure.
You might be.
I'm just using a figure off the accounts rather than
Yeah. So
something else.
they'll be going through and they're looking at the net costs, and they'll be looking at different things. Yeah.
Right, and then lastly, and I've brought it up before, and I know I have, I'm not losing it.
Leave that judgment to us, Councillor.
Stuck record. But our wages bill is now up to $38 million. When we started as a council, it was 26 million. It's gone up $12 million in our watch. And that's, to me, is a really scary figure, unless we can get some assurance. I agree that we're in this period of recovery, and we expect to get stuff done. But it worries me that I can't see which portion of that bill is directly related to recovery, and how easy is that bill going to be to crank back when we have recovered.
So,
or we're going to be stuck with long-term contracts, etc., etc.
No, I think you need to give a tiny bouquet to Pauline and her team, and Nadine, who every year gives us the opportunity to take a specific look at what we are doing this year, what we are accounting for this year. The fact that we have a huge wage bill reflects the fact that in the last year and going forward, we will be doing the work of two councils. So I do want you to be mindful. If the situation changes, you will see that at the next annual plan. If it changes again, we have the opportunity to chime in all the time. We don't make decisions and then come back in 15 years. We take a look every 6 weeks when we have finance and performance to check, but also for bigger decision making and that higher looking at numbers, we have at least one big goal every annual plan, and then we report on that and it gets audited. So I acknowledge what you say, and you have raised your concerns before, and I'm sure every councillor around the table share those concerns, but we do need to be mindful that these teams are getting in more people to do more work. There is the Cat 3, the Cat 2s, which at this stage, active work happening, lots more roading work, lots more flood protection, so that is reflected in that wage bill.
And through the chair, so in the benchmarking work that Pauline's team has done, relative to the other unitaries, our salary and wages cost is about 16 or 17% of the total bill, whereas they're sitting at around 20%. So that gives some assurance also that we're on par, if not in terms of what we're doing with other comparison to other unitaries.
Councillor, you've finished, Councillor Alder? Councillor Para.
I know that we've sort of finished that conversation now, but I kind of want to support some of the things that Councillor Alder is saying, mostly because firstly, just wanted to acknowledge the mahi that we do and the great pressure we've had, especially in this term, seeing us go from where we started Cyclone Gabrielle and now into the depths of recovery, which is now becoming BAU as we move further and further away from the event. So I just want to acknowledge the breadth of mahi that the council has undertaken, just to support the points that Councillor Alder is making, is that I think it's important for our community to see what part of this mahi is out of our norm, like what part of it sits outside of our normal BAU scope, because whilst we're so embedded in the work of the council, even we can't really see it at all, just becoming part of one big giant picture. But for our people, they must know that this is not normal for us to be picking up woody debris and all of the recovery works. This is beyond, above and beyond. So I think for the annual plan, it's worth even just a little picture, a graph of some kind to show above and beyond our bread and butter mahi. This is the recovery mahi that we've been doing, and this is how much it represents, so that when we hopefully eventually stop doing it, that people will know it has always sat beyond.
Because, Councillor Parata, we do break our rates take up in 11.4, where 8.3 is BAU, and then it's a 1.5 recovery rate. So there's a little bit of that, but I'll hand over to Pauline just to
I just think it's worthwhile. That's all.
I think it's a very good point, and just to reiterate, because when the annual plan is a part to revisit if there's any minor changes that we actually need to go from what you actually said within the thread, because we did that 18 months ago. So therefore, it's a chance to reset it. What is it? What do we need to do? But it is telling the story of where we were in that 3-year plan, and what did we start in those things. We were under an inordinate amount of pressures with regards to the inflation was nearly 6% more than what we actually anticipated. We had the loss of dividends, which was around 4%. We had disposal costs, which was an additional 1%. We had interest costs that were 6%. And we had the recovery itself, which was 5%. We were looking at that first year, 22% increase in rates, and thereafter 10% in the 2 following years. What we did was to separate that from that very point so you could actually articulate what were the pressures that we were under, and we said to get that business as usual cost back down to 7.9, just under that for the 3 years, not as a max, and then also acknowledge that our recovery cost would be a maximum of 3.5. We used that 3.5 in the first year in terms of the recovery costs, but we know that, hey, as we go through, there could be other events, and so there may be adding to the additional costs that we've already incurred. So that, you're quite right, it is a significant bill, it is a significant amount of how we actually tried to moderate it and get it to where it was. And so there was a myriad of tools that actually we did to get it through and to smooth those impacts. One of them being acknowledgement that we would charge some of that recovery rate, which that recovery is uniform in the dual charge, so every property the same, which was about $80 on that first year, and then the costs associated with it, acknowledging at that one time that those are affected with the high capital values, pastoral and horticultural. If we did not do that, the impact to them would have been significant. But on the other side of it, it creates a regressive tax. And a regressive tax means those people that have no ability with their income to move up are impacted more than others. So we increased the hardship in terms of remissions. And so we acknowledge those two things in terms of, rather than trying to put those costs, hold it, and then future ratepayers paying. So it was an inordinate, difficult situation that you summed up beautifully in terms of where you were as a poor storm and how you moderated it. If we haven't, and so some of those things where we say, what are the rates, what are you doing, it tries to reiterate that backstory that we've already gone. I hope that answers the questions. It might have been rather too wordy, but I think it is actually important to acknowledge where we were and how we actually got there, and this is just an annual plan tweaking in to see what are the minor changes from that original adoption.
Thank you so much, Pauline.
Councillor Tibble.
Kia ora tātou. I just want to add further to what we've just gone through. Is it likely that it's likely that we'll experience more climate change in the future and that recoveries of this kind might occur? Further to Rawenia and Councillor Plata and Councillor Alder's conversations, it may become important to extract this out in a way where the community absolutely sees that difference, knowing that it's expected that more climate change events are likely in the future. And putting that front and centre allows people to keep track of what is our actual work versus what are our remedial works, essentially. Your explanation was fantastic, by the way, so thank you for that, Pauline.
Through Worship, there is also, so this is our Year 2 annual plan. We will be heading into hopefully a
Touch wood, everyone.
10-year plan where we can be more strategic, do a bit of a reset around our cost drivers, but not wanting to be negative Nadine. We are facing some real significant adverse drivers here that will create some difficulty in terms of our finance, our budget sheet, the impact on our community, especially if we think about the emergency works becoming business as usual. We've got NZTA's changes to the emergency works policy, which will have a significant impact on
When do we
our
hear
community.
about that?
Is it March, I think?
Yeah.
March, confirm the board, and then there are.
Those emergency.
So, yeah, so we do have a reset opportunity. It might not be the happy reset that we're looking for, but there is one with the 10-year plan.
But saying that, I do appreciate the sentiment, both from Councillor Alder, Parata and Tibble, that, you know, for us who look at the numbers all the time or see what's happening, it might be really straightforward. We might just highlight somewhere a bit more, saying this is not what we usually do. We know it is a recovery plan, and this is the percentage, just even a nice visual somewhere, which I'll leave up to you, Pauline, to sort out. Kapai? Any more questions? I am happy to move this paper. I'm proud to move this paper. Thank you, Councillor Telfer. Any more questions? Councillor Alder, anything else?
Sorry,
you
I
wanted
had
to ask? Oh, you wanted to ask a question. Are you also seconding it? Cool. The floor is yours, sir.
Yeah, just back to page 118, just clarification around
118.
118.
Thank you.
Just clarification around the rates increase. It says there that increase of 9.9, excluding growth. Can we just have a clarification around that? Because originally we were presuming there was going to be an 11% increase. Can you just explain what the excluding growth piece of the jigsaw puzzle is?
So the requirements to actually explain what is the percentages is what is the percentage over last year. And so if there were no growth is new rateable properties onto our system, onto our council, sorry, and they weren't there last year. So the growth is different. So when we look at, we estimated the assumption being in the 3-year plan that there would be a 0.5% of growth. So we look at each year, is that different? Is it lower than what we anticipated, in which case that would change? Or if it's higher, we adjust it accordingly. And that's based on actual rateable properties, the numbers that they have. And just for your references, there's just under 200 new rateable units that comes onto the systems, mostly from subdivisions. The majority would be in around the city, which is what we call DRA 1 and 1A, and it's about 80. The further going out, DRA 2 is 23, DRA, as we go up the coast, 22, DRA 4, 36, and DRA 5 right up the coast is 29. So we look at that as an actual number of what that is. So it's basically the increase in the number of rateable units over the previous year. We don't include that in the percentage from the previous year.
So people can expect to arrive on their rates bill an increase of 9 point.
Average, so let me just say average, yeah.
My other one was page 181. It is.
181.
Just around the superannuation schemes, I'm just curious. Have we got a superannuation scheme here for staff? And just reading through that, it sounded like it was very. It basically says the scheme is multi-employer defined benefit scheme. Insufficient information is available to use defined benefit accounting, as it is not possible to determine the scheme. It just sounds like.
I've never had that answer asked question, but good on you for looking at these kind of things with it. This is more defined in terms of the annual report, and they've used the same kind of the notes that come through. From a planning perspective, it doesn't really apply, but what this just means, how do you account for it and how do you cost it? If people are joined up to any of those, and it's minimal ones for the National Provident Fund associated with it, that would be taken into account, how they do it from a accounting perspective. So all it is, you've got an accounting standards, you've got a range of ways to account for it. We're saying in that particular ones, in the annual report, we would account for it in a little different manner.
We don't run a superannuation scheme.
No.
No, that's just, I'm looking at it and saying, why is this here? I didn't understand. So that was ignorance, but yeah, okay.
Councillor Alden.
I've got another question. So note 7 on page 189.
189, councillors.
184.
184.
Let's recharge to other expense categories. So employee benefits is 45 million. Less recharged to other expense categories, 9.2 million. So can you remind me what that is?
So what happens if you we can't record it in two places? So what happens? You record all of the cost of the employee cost, but if they're actually a project manager and they're working in the capital cost, it goes to the cost of capital. So that's just saying, yes, it's capitalised, and so therefore it's not in the employee cost, but we're reporting the kind of all of the names of the expenditure you see in there, but it's going to be either charged to the capital cost, or in some cases, if there's funding associated with those employees, then that will be charged to those expenditures over there, so the revenue would take for account of that. So the net cost under the employees, because we've already recorded it, can't record it twice because it's already recorded in the capital cost.
Councillor Tupara. We've got it.
Yeah.
Councillor Tupara.
Page 138, when we're describing our rohe in the circle titled Our Whenua, we list 4 regional iwi. Wondering what reference goes against us declaring that, given that the Waitangi Tribunal recognises 6 in the rohe.
If it's missed out, I apologise, and we will capture it.
Any other questions or queries, councillors? So I move. Oh, Councillor Pahuru Huriwai.
Thank you, and thank you for the report. I really enjoyed the graphics, so I like the graphics, and they tell a lot in a succinct way. Just a couple of spellings, minor spelling. What page? Sorry, 118, I think. 118. She's missed about whare kahika. The healthy people. Healthy people, and also tangata whenua. Just a couple of spellings there.
Thank you.
Probably wouldn't have noticed, except it was whare kahika. But that's all I had to add. Thank you. Oh, and I enjoyed also on page 220 the functions, how you've split up our functions, because I think the more we talk about that, especially with this being an election year, that our communities are reading that and understanding, a better understanding of the role and responsibilities that we have as councillors. So thank you for including.
Councillor Robinson.
So, quick question, just a question. Why is every second page number circled down the bottom of each page?
Bit interesting.
It's just the graphics that are used in the 3-year.
The first time I thought, oh, someone's already audited my document. And then,
No, it was the graphics that they used in the 3-year plan.
Okay, we do have a mover in myself. We have a seconder in Councillor Telfer. If there are no more questions, and councillors, if you have any other smaller stuff you want to email through to me and Pauline, please do so before the end of the day. Tapai? All in favour? Aye. Contrary? Carried. Thank you. Thank you, Pauline. Thank you, Nadine. Okay, councillors. You know, I didn't do a proper job this morning. I didn't do leave of absence. I didn't do acknowledgements and tributes. And someone asked me about acknowledgements and tributes. You asked me about acknowledgements and tributes. One acknowledgement I want to note is the passing of Matua Owen Lloyd's. So I just want to acknowledge him. He actively works with council, and we just send our aroha to him and his mother. Nothing else that I can think of. Public input and petitions, not today. No extraordinary business, no notice of motion, no adjourned business. Okay, councillors, I'm going to take you to page 14, which is our fees and charges, which we take a look at every year. And some of these we have discussed before. I am not going to allow silly nitpicking. I'm just letting you know now. Tony, I'm very sorry. I can read the disappointment on your face. There's none of that. If you have strategic, high-level questions, this is your place. If you are just going to nitpick, no. But all fair questions, this is your place. Thank you very much. Okay, Pauline, do you want to open and just give a little background, how we get to setting our fees, how we adjust for inflation, all those kinds of things?
Sure. So just as a little bit of a point, the attachments unfortunately were transposed when they were attached to the document, and when it says refer to attachment 1, it should have been, it's now been put in attachment 2. So just remember that you're adopting the report, the draft report is actually attachment 2, which starts on page 73. All right, the pages before was just a working document to actually say, hey, what were the differences between last year and this year? But the document that you are, it's being referred to as the draft fees and charges is on page 73. Having said that, mechanics ago, as it says in here, there are certain principles that we look at under PINs, your fees and charges. The first, obviously, your overarching document is your 3-year plan. And within that 3-year plan, what is it that you are intending to do, what do you need to do, and what do you actually say, what is the fees, revenues that you need to actually, for the activities concerns. The second underpinning document that you have is the revenue and financing policy. And in that revenue and financing policy, it defines each activity, what do you expect to receive in rates, and then what do you expect as a percentage to receive from revenue. Those two go hand in hand to actually say what are the charges that you actually have, and then the next part it looks at, okay, we adopted the 3-year plan, but most of them, what do we assume in terms of that, was the inflationary rates used? So some of it starts from the previous year, what are the inflations over that in order to achieve what was adopted and set out within the estimates. Things change. Legislation change, regulation fees set by legislation have increased, and some that's outside of our control. And what we say, any of those changes come straight away. We notify on the website of those changes, and they're incorporated in here. Anything that was different than that, the third part is, most of them is a cost recovery basis. If those costs have been identified as increasing, they've been notified as a different. So there's those three elements that you actually have. In terms of this, we've got the details of those changes, especially summarised within the early part of the documents and the attached, now it says attachment 2. Happy to take any questions about those changes that is outlined within those draft fees and changes.
Okay. Councillor Teddy, Councillor Tony.
Yeah, reading through this, I think I'm sweet with all the 2 to 3% inflation costs. That's any issues with that. My issue is in regards to the resource consent costs. I looked at local government New Zealand. Chris Bishop mentioned that we're going to get rid of all these consenting costs that don't actually add value to the projects, and so the money can go to actual physical works. But yeah, looking at this, it seems that we've actually done the opposite. We've added so many more consenting costs and some new costs on page 29, section 3, section whatever. I'm not sure what those costs are. It just says sections. You'd like to know what those costs are, and the costs are gone up heaps. I rang a few building mates last night. I'd love to throw them on speakerphone, but it wouldn't be appropriate in here. But I'm just astounded at the increase in these resource consent costs, when a year ago I was told they're going to be reduced and got rid of. I'm not sure what's happened there.
I'll just explain. As it said in the paper, and you're tabled also in front of you, just some of those resource consents, deposits, some more benchmarking which are more appropriate. So that's in front of you just to show where we sit compared to cohorts. A deposit, just like it says, it is money down before you do the work. What the work is it is charged on a cost basis of the hours or what it actually costs. So that's on the fundamental amounts that are in the front. So if you don't do as much, it doesn't cost as much, then you would be refunded. But this is reflected, this is just to say more money is required up front because this is the costs that you're actually doing as an interim. Hasn't actually changed those bases of how we charge are exactly the same. All we're saying is that the deposit that we receive up front is more than what it was before.
No, I'm not talking about the deposits, I'm talking about the actual costs.
But that's what Joe, yeah.
So Joe will, Teddy.
So through you, Your Worship, and just to say that one of our frequent consultancies in town that puts in a lot of resource consent applications has actually asked for this initial lodgement fee to be increased to more fairly, give a better indication of what the likely costs are, because at the moment the lodgement fee is quite low relative. We know the consent processing will cost more in every single time, and yet they find it hard to manage when they're dealing with their clients, particularly for smaller consents, when they have to then go back and say, oh, and here's your additional bill. They wanted that upfront lodgement fee, deposit fee to more fairly reflect what the likely costs might be.
Yeah, I think there's a...
We still have to process resource consents under the current legislation. Yes, that might change in the future as per Chris Bishop's announcements, but we are not in that place at the moment. So under the law, we have to process resource consent.
And that might take 2 election cycles.
Yeah. We're still waiting for that.
It's the truth, though.
Yeah, it just seems like he said something and...
Yeah, but it doesn't. But really, we need to be mindful that politicians says a lot of things, and like I say, it might take 2 or 3 cycles for that to then filter down to local government. What Joe is saying, we still have to do what we have to do. Doesn't matter what Chris Bishop said 1 year ago. Nothing has changed for us. We don't set these rules. It comes from top.
Yeah, but I haven't put a consent in for ages, but speaking to building mates, they're all adamant the consenting costs have skyrocketed in the last year or two.
Can we talk about what it went up with? Because I don't want us to use anecdotal evidence from 4 mates.
So when we were analysing the information, bear in mind this is just a deposit, okay? So the costs are in line with inflation.
So the deposit part,
Yeah.
that makes sense.
So if we say that on average consents are about 2,500 of all the ones that we do, which is in line with the 2.5, and some of them, it's on average on that. Over those, there was about 20 that were over $13,000 compared to the complexity, and they go up, and I think the highest was about 22, I can't remember. So those are your range. But the 80% rule would have been within that $2,500 to $3,000.
But I think what Councillor Thompson is referring to, what I would like clarity on, it is not like in the last year or two, our consent fees have increased significantly. They have increased inflationary. So I just want to clarify that the fees have not changed since you've been on council. They change with inflation every year when we come to fees and charges. So it's not like suddenly last year consent fees shot up. No. And yeah.
I suppose I'd like to see the average cost of a consent now compared to what it was 2 years ago. And
just deduct the inflation.
Well, that inflation probably easily pulled out.
Anywho, that is something that's a specific, if you want your mates for us to look at how it changed, I'm sure Julian can, through the councillor request, take a look at those specific stuff. Let's just stick to this document.
And a clarification, we are going to be doing work in this space over the next 3 to 6 months with regards to overall benchmarking. So you will see more information coming back with regards to a wider range of fees and charges. So yes.
They did make the comment that compared to other places in New Zealand, historically we've been low, and it is bringing us up more aligned with other places. But the costs have come up.
Any more questions, Councillor Thompson? Next I have Councillor Robinson, then Councillor Foster, and then Councillor Wharehinga.
So carrying on that point, I've got two. The first one does carry on Councillor Thompson's point. Page 17, the third bullet point, there's a really good paragraph which talks about that the rationale for increasing the resource consent deposits. And I think it's really responsible of council to actually increase that deposit level. So therefore you're upfront saying to the applicant and their client, this is more reflective of what your fees may be. So you don't get that surprise and therefore people being upset with us. It's better to have a no surprises policy. I do see though in that paragraph it refers to the deposit being more reflective of the final cost and represents around 43% of the average cost of a resource consent, which means an average cost is just over 5,000, whereas previously it represented about 25%. I'm all for deposits, and I'm all for us communicating to the community that we still provide an excellent value, we still benchmark well below our peers, and it is still cheaper to do business with our council than it is many other councils. And that's the story that maybe Councillor Thompson needs to be speaking to his friends about and saying, yeah, it's actually still cheaper here in Gisborne and you still get a very personalised service and good outcomes in timely fashion. That's my take on that. The question I do have relates to water costs, and that is on page 70, and it says that the cost of water has gone up to $2.10 per cubic metre plus GST, an increase of 13.5%. I think when I entered council, water cost about $1.15 a cube. I just want to make sure that we are pricing that to reflect the cost of getting water to the consumer. 13.5% is way in excess of any inflationary rate. I want to really make sure, just because water usage by our industries is so critical to our businesses. So if someone can just assist on that, please.
You're very right. It is correct. We check on those kind of things. So it's actually been a catch-up in the last 2 years. So prior to that, 2021, we had about $1.44, $1.52, the following year $1.59, $1.65, $1.85 and $2.10 last year. Now what has happened with, as we see, inflationary rates, especially within the cost of water and the cost of contracts, at that point when we had the lower amounts, we were recording 16.9% within our fees and charges increase, but in actual fact it was 33% in actual real terms of the cost of producing water. So what we do is, this part of the process, we see is how much does it cost to produce, how many cubic metres of waters that do we produce? And then we say, okay, what is the cost per that cubic metre? And then we estimate, that's how you actually arrive at this. Now there are some industry-specific costs that isn't actually go across all the users. So for argument's sake, the demand management is only for the commercial kind of areas. There's the maintenance and the depreciation costs associated with water meters. Those kind of things are particularly for that. So what the actual cost to produce, what we're saying for next year's, is around about $1.86, and then there's 26. The difference is particular to the commercial costs. So that's how we arrive at it. Has to be how much water do we produce? What is the cost that we have? We divide it out and we actually work out this is the cost per cubic metre.
So you're confident that this price accurately reflects the cost of getting water from there to there?
That's all of our costs that we're forecasting. That's completely all of the costs associated with those.
Thank you. Thank you for the explanation.
Councillor Robinson.
I have. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Councillor Foster, and then Councillor Wharehinga, and then Councillor Talfa.
Yeah, thank you. It's just on 17, bottom of 17, and I'll declare an interest in the CBD. But I mean, I'm not comparing the 50-cent increase in parking fees, but I've got a little bit of a query on number 10 at the bottom of page 17. In addition, new parking meters have higher operational costs of around $100 grand a year. How do we have extra operational costs on our parking meters when there's only a few compared to what there used to be?
Yeah, sure. Through the chair, we are offering a different and higher level of service with the new machines. So we've got other payment facilities that are a part of that environment, like PayWave, credit card, debit facilities, in addition to the coin operation. That comes with a whole software system that sits behind that to make all of that work and to get money from people into our bank account is associated with that. So there is a higher level of service and costs associated with that. What I can also say about that is that the vendors that are associated with those software packages are definitely increasing for inflation, but that sort of speaks to the key costs operationally. CapEx-wise, those machines cost more, so we're seeing increased costs both in terms of CapEx and OpEx associated with the high level of service.
Okay, cool. Okay, thanks. Also, I just wanted to identify a strange anomaly that we've got in our CBD, because we've got differing parking fees in the side streets, Low Street in particular has become highlighted. A lot of people have been mentioning it to me. There's actually no parking signs and no pay machines in Low Street. So people are getting fined for not paying any fees. The only place they can go and pay their fees is at the main street, which is 50 cents dearer. So, and I put an RFS in for this, but yeah, it's strange that we have got nothing available in Low Street and no signage or anything. So,
Thank you for highlighting that. James.
Yeah, thank you again through the chair. That is an issue we're aware of, Councillor Foster. Just in terms of parking, we're taking quite a fine-tooth comb across that activity this year, just to understand sort of lots of different things associated with parking, including the placement of meters costs. This is part of that process, the fees associated with that, and how we manage that process both in terms of officer activity as well. So it's something we are looking at consciously this year. Cheers.
All right, thank you.
Thank you for highlighting that, Councillor Foster. Councillor Wharehinga, and then Talfa.
Thank you very much, Your Worship. I'm comfortable with where we're sitting at in terms of our fees and charges. I'm comfortable with an extra 25% per cubic metre of water. 25 cents, which is the 13% thing, but in real dollar terms, it's only 25% per cubic metre. I'm comfortable with where we're sitting at in terms of our resource consenting costs. You know, that it brings us on par with where the other councils are at, but more importantly, there's a cost to having to do these things, and we're the ones that end up having to hold the baby if things go wrong. So I'm comfortable with all of those things. I'd like to remind us too that we're just deciding on this as the paper to go out for consultation. If your friends have feedback, or if our whānau have feedback or whatever, let's remind them to engage during March and April, because that's the really strong part that feeds into our fees and charges, is when the community come and actually engage in this process. I'm happy to move this paper, Your Worship.
Thank you for that. Councillor Telfer, Councillor Alder.
Yeah, firstly, just on page 59, around impounding dogs. We've got a first impounding fee, we've got a second impounding fee, we've got a third impounding fee. Goes from $72 to $84 to $116. Is that a disincentive? Like, really, if we're serious about making, you know, it just seems a little bit...
Set by government.
Well, is it set by government?
Increments.
Well, yeah.
From first
Seems a little bit.
to fourth as those percentages are set.
Okay. Anyway, my other one was just basically going back to Tony's, Councillor Robinson's point around the water rate, commercial rate, water rate increase. Is that solely inflationary? It seems quite a jump from 185 to 210. Is that, say, the cost of that water? Is any of that come from the recovery side of it? Because if it has, I just want to make sure that that's not because of the recovery cost of our water. We've gone to this fee because what we tend to have is these fees go up, they never seem to go down again, and it probably comes back to Colin's point earlier on this morning around the salary and wages side of it, and what parts are included in the recovery. When that's over, let's say, hope we're not going to have this again for a long time. You know, we want to know that, these are genuine things, and I just want to make sure it's not part of recovery, because it's quite an increase for commercial users.
Your Worship. So, no, those costs are the actual cost of the activity for delivering those kind of things. If you've got some of the recovery costs that were at the water, most of that was either capital, and just to remind you, that as a sort of a proxy, you have about $9 million worth of capital expenditure, and that's 1% increase in rates. However, with most of so basically these are operating costs. These are actually what they are. So the recovery costs in the three waters is associated with capital, and most of that capital costs were funded from NEMA or our insurance. So no, it's the cost of operating our water supply. If they've gone up because we have operating two systems and doing the other things associated with, some of that where we can recoup back from insurers and we make assumptions about that, it won't be included in this.
That seemed quite a large increase from previously.
Go, Nadine. I didn't see you.
Just on, through your worship, just on water, so with the local water done well changes anyway, and the introduction of water economic regulator, water pricing will be more transparent. And in fact, what we might see is it increase overall. So there will be robust modelling that will sit behind it that will then ensure that water fees are set fair, transparent across New Zealand. Possibly, and we're not sure what this means around council's price setting, but we'd have to meet some particular thresholds and ensure that we are covering our water in a sustainable way. So you may see that this is a teeny blip on what we might be looking at into the future for charging water right across Gisborne district.
You finished, Councillor Telfer? All good. Councillor Alder and then Councillor
Thank you.
Gregory.
First comment on page 18.11. I can't quite make sense of that, but I'm guessing that the parking meters are costing us $600,000 a year. I spent a lovely week a month ago in Karakia and Apotiki. They don't charge for parking. I had no trouble finding parks, and there's no stress in shopping. I'd like to suggest we do a survey of town users and find out how much those parking meters disincentivise the use of the centre.
So, Councillor Alder, in my time, I've been part of 2 surveys with the public. Shop owners don't want that because, and I'm just using, say, farmers as an example, I'm not picking on farmers. All the employees then fill up all the spaces. So we have asked before, and then we've had written submissions. I remember Brian Bramwell writing to me saying, hey, this is not something we will support. What we want is to move people on. So we have done that, and we can find that and send it through to you twice. And I'm not saying we can't do it again, but we have asked Councillor Foster, he knows that journey very well.
Well, I think it works well in Foxhame.
It does.
Moving on, I see this fees and charges as a really good opportunity to start manipulating things in our favour. And to raise a couple of points, we have the DrainWise system, which I think I gather we're not charging for a connection, but we're about to charge for a connection. If we advertise the fact that it's free at the moment, it's going to cost you soon. That would help DrainWise find the connections. And if we also back that with a fine, that after a certain date, you're going to get fined if you're not connected. Other areas that we could use to incentivise would be the cost of adding granny flats and or tiny houses on back sections. If we cut back or subsidised the cost of the consenting on those, we would be able to increase our population quite easily and cheaply. Another area I thought of was the solar panels on the roofs. In Australia, solar panels now contribute significantly to their power supply. Solar panels in a region like Gisborne, if incentivised and encouraged, would create a lot more a resilient community where we get a power cut, we're going to have a lot more houses with power. And so there's lots of sensible reasons to incentivise through cost in this area, and I'd like us to look at that.
So, Councillor Alder, may I suggest that as we move in the next year or so into our next 10-year plan, and as we reset these fees, that those very smart ideas that you just shared, that we then take them up and also ask the community to comment on them when we consult on this, because this is just a consultation document. So I hear what you're saying, and I'm a big supporter of solar panels as well, but they're quite costly. So if we can work with partners like Trust Airāwhiti, and they've done it before for insulation, so absolutely, those are the type of ideas we will carry forward. I don't know if someone wanted to comment, Tim, on the DrainWise comments. If we say to people at this stage, your connection is free, but in future there might be a cost for the connection, is that something, Pauline, that we can do going forward? Is it fair?
We did charge before any special connections associated with it, but the cost there, it was probably only $50, and now it's $150 because of the cost to do it. So the costs were there, but there are elements of that. How do you communicate in terms of those kind of things?
Yeah, to some extent, we do that on the ground. We help parties who maybe can't afford themselves certain circumstances, but we're also dealing now with a lot of parties who just don't engage at all on anything. So some of the logical expectations you might get won't bear out in full, but it could be something worth investigating a bit more and more formally, because some people just, we've found most issues, you know, where we look, and some people just refuse to engage at all.
You know, we're in a situation, if I park overnight in town, I get slapped with a $40 fine, But if I'm willingly ducting my rainwater into the septic and causing huge disruption in the city, it's okay.
It's not okay. It is not okay.
We need to bring in a stick.
It's becoming the right time for that. I guess it hasn't been while we've been working through, but it's becoming a better environment to actually consider the stick.
Because we've done a lot of carrot in the last 4 or 5 years, so as we now move, 4 or 5 years we've done drain wires. So thank you for that, Councillor Older. Okay, Councillor Gregory.
Thank you. It's not nitpicky, but kind of is.
Go for it.
It's just with regards to the litter enforcement, and I know that it's regulatory, and I know that we can't actually change it, but it's been $400 for a major dump, the fine for that, since I've been on council. And it's a huge issue in our community, and it really degrades our place, and it brings everyone down, and you see a lot of it on social media, people really upset about it. I just don't think $400 is any incentive, and I wish that we could perhaps lobby central government to do something about this fine and make it something that is really worthwhile chasing up and hitting people with, so that we can stop that and look after our place.
That's something we'll communicate to as well. There are quite a few issues where the rule set by them is quite loosey-goosey. James?
Just through the chair, we do advocate for that, so we've done quite a bit of that. There's quite a lot of statutory fees that haven't been reviewed for quite some time. You have seen some change in that space with parking, for example. Yes. There's been a sweeping amount of changes after a long period of hiatus around reviewing, but the same is true for other areas of enforcement. So whenever we get the opportunity, we certainly advocate for that, and I've done that in a number of areas, probably over the last 6 to 12 months.
Anyone that haven't spoken yet? Councillor Pahuruhurewai.
Thank you, Your Worship. I'm reading this, I might be wrong, but it says on page 18, under 11, under parking again, point 11, if council were to make parking meters free as provided with some districts, the cost of the operating and monitoring the parking meters would fall to the ratepayer. What would they be monitoring if it was free?
They still need to move people on every 2 hours.
Restriction, yeah.
Oh.
There's still people that will have to check, because that's what people want. They want it free, but they still want the service provided. So the conundrum we're dealing with, we still need people to do exactly the same job as when there's a meter fining cars, but now they just need to make sure cars move every 2 hours. So the function is still there, but we're not getting any income from the parking meters.
Sorry, just in addition to that, we're not just doing the parking side, we can also issue tickets on behalf of the government for not having a warrant of fitness, not having a registration. So the function that we're responsible for is more than just your stop standing and moving people on.
Right. Thank you. I get it now.
Anyone that haven't spoken yet? Okay, Councillor Thompson, you're going to wrap a bow around this report. Thank you. And remember, everyone, encourage people to submit. This is a consultation document. We're not passing anything here today. We're passing a consultation document. The floor is yours, Councillor Thompson.
Yeah, just a couple of comments in relation to Colin's comments about the parking. In my previous lives, I actually looked after parking in City Watch at council for a couple of years, and we have done free trials. So parking actually, when I was there, brought in $1.5 million, which if that money wasn't coming in, you'd be paying that in your rate. So it's one of the only areas in council that actually brings the revenue in. And so they're looking at if the price of parking went up or down, how that affects shopping, and if it was free parking, whether that would affect shopping. And when it was free parking, what they found was all the workers actually just parked outside each other's shops. So they've done those trials, and on top of your BAU, it's heaps of work to do those trials and everything from those trials, but the cost of parking and free parking doesn't actually have an effect on shopping in town at the end of the day.
Thank you for that, Councillor Thompson. And yeah, it's very interesting because if you compare us to Wellington or Auckland or Hamilton, our costs are relatively low. I hear what you're saying, whakatane in places. I love it to get a free old park. It does make your shopping experience better. But at the end of the day, people, we are trying to balance a function we run with money that comes in. So those discussions can still be open, Councillor Alder, and thank you for raising that. But also thank you, Councillor Thompson, for giving your first-hand insight into that. Who is going to move this paper for consultation? Moved by Councillor Wharehinga, seconded by Councillor Foster. All in favour? Carried. Coffee. Speak up, Colin.
Online.
Everyone, this is a great reminder that please speak loudly and clearly, because this is not only for anyone in the public or the Gisborne Herald or whoever wants to listen in, it's also for our lovely staff who sometimes need to go back and check what we seek to make sure the minutes reflect that. Councillors, we have our 3 stock standard reports in front of us, which we see every 6 weeks. That is our Treasury report 225. Thank you. Pauline, do you want to highlight anything in this report? It looks quite stock standard.
It pretty much is. It's just to say our external debt as at the 31st of December is 178 million. Where we expect to be, we expect at the end of the year to be 195 million. And why we borrow to do our capital works. So as our capital works progress, we expect to borrow more by the end of the financial year. Pretty much all the things that we have within our Treasury policy to make sure that we're in prudent financial management, they're all within the policy guidelines. But happy to take any questions that you may have.
Any questions or queries in regards to our Treasury report? If not, is someone... Thank you, Councillor Wharehinga. Is there a seconder? Councillor Thompson, thank you. No questions? All in favour? Aye. Contrary? Thank you. Now we move to our financial report that carries the information up to December last year. So that is the last bit of the year. Any questions or queries? There is on page 237, the finances start. Thank you, Pauline. I always enjoy the notes because that clarify when you look at the numbers and you see some outliers. I'll just tell you, it's usually a timing issue. Councillor Foster, thank you.
Yeah, just a query on page 237 on the chart. There's where in the variance of the grants, donations, subsidies and contributions capital, there's a variance of minus 12,561,000, and I'm just that's from grants, and I'm just wondering what that might be.
Specifically, it's probably the time that we phased it. So the capital work, you see the capital program at the front of page 234, and then the third bullet point down, it says the capital expenditure is 40 million and it represents 78%. So it's just, and that's of the difference of the timing where they are. So basically, we expect that to go through and follow it out.
Okay, and then page 241, I think yeah, we've got community property management 735% over budget, and pool operations 553 over budget. But is that an area of concern?
Wait a minute. The pool operations. I don't think it. I'll have to come back what the community property management is. I think it's actually this building.
This building.
Yeah. So if we were doing some, and we got some of the revenue and things associated. So if we were doing anything or over and above the furniture and things that were in there, you would have the cost in there. But usually, most of the times, we've kind of got offsets associated with it. So for argument's sake, if there are any leases, etc., associated with a joint arrangement with our CCO, the offset of that would kind of pay for these additional costs. So, but I'd have to come back and just remind myself of those details associated with. I have gone through the kind of the details, and they didn't raise any red flags, but I can't remember specifically what they are at this particular point.
Okay, yeah, because it looks like the 735% is 645,000, which is not significant, and the pool operations is 25,000, so that's less. But anyway.
And the percentages is kind of the misnomer. It's really the absolute dollars that you would be looking at for those kind of things. But
645,000 is certainly for the community property management.
Yeah, and I'll come back with that. I'm pretty sure there's revenue associated with it. Some of them may be even in terms of the theatres, and normally we put that commentary, and I must have missed that. And so if there are additional external funds associated to do the works in there, that would account for the capital fit outs. But I'll come back and I'll update that. Yes.
You have comments afterwards about it, but wasn't anything about those two, and they're glaringly, obviously, huge variance, huge increases. Yeah. Cool. Thank you.
Anyone? Councillor Alder?
Thank you, Your Worship. Page 238, 6, employee benefits expenses. They're under budget in part due to vacancies and offsets by higher professional service costs. Would it be possible to have a budget for, the budget actual figure, for higher professional service costs?
What we can do next time is actually more explanation in there. With the details. In terms of, so with the adoption of the annual plan, and we do in the annual report, we give a note that says what makes up the expenditure and operating costs, and they give it what we expected and what it is. So it is reported at that higher details within the notes, but in the interim we can pass a little bit more information in there.
And we can't have the figures.
Yeah. That would be exactly the same as what we report on the annual report or in the annual plan, on those same basis. Yeah.
Page 256, are we on to those wage debt?
Next
part
one.
of this, or is that
I think we're in the next paper.
Right,
Good. Any more questions? If not, anyone willing to move this paper? Councillor Foster, seconded by Councillor Gregory. All in favour? Contrary, carried. Okay, we go to our last report for our open meeting today, page 247, councillors. Welcome, Fiona. We talk about the rates and sundry invoice debt management. Councillor Alder, you had a question of Fiona about debt collection, was that correct? If you can just verbalise that again, that would be fantastic.
So page 256, just in the general land aid rate debt, it's just very concerning how in the last 2 years, 23, 24, 24, 25, that is ramping up.
Maybe a reflection of life, maybe a reflection of the cost of living, insurance, interest, all those costs as well. But what do we do with that?
And well, we know why. I've had a few people report to me that they're not paid their rates because. And yeah, are we digging into the why for that?
Can I just answer before Fiona goes into a little bit more details? I think this hits us every time because it's really hard to understand what this is saying, and actually where do you need to be concerned with it. Those graphs, which are the middle graphs on that page 256, you've got what that is saying, when did the debt occur? And so, unfortunately, in 24, 25, we consider that current. It's in, so you can see the higher cost associated with it, and you can see that maybe there's lower ones and minor ones here. This trend follows every single kind of reports. They have a diminishing amounts that go through. Yeah. What we try to actually say, articulate, where do you need to know, where do you need to see where the issues are, and we give that within those other graphs on page 249, and we talk about it in collectability, because bear in mind, debt or rates in absolute figures, this is year on year, but how we, what's the amount that we actually get and collect from rates. And so these ones here shows that there is a little bit of pressure in the general rates. If you're looking in the yellow line on that bottom part of that graph, it says, okay, we started at 4.6, last year it was 5.5, and now it's 5.7. So you can see that there has been a little bit of pressure, especially in the kind of the general rates from the COVID period and addition of things. But from last year, it is a 0.2% increase in the overall. So we're mindful of that, but when you look at that, sometimes it's a little bit, it doesn't tell the full story, because you're always going to see that same trend, because most of your debt is going to be in the current year, as you would expect. But if there's anything else.
Because I do know that the green line is suddenly appearing there too, so there's fines being put out there which haven't been in the past.
So just clarification on that, they're penalties.
Yeah.
There were two regimes. We did have a kind of punitive, we applied all the penalties. There was penalties on penalties. So in terms of this, is if you haven't paid by the due date of the rates, there is a penalty that you pay on that. But the system allowed that if after 6 months you hadn't paid that, you got penalties on your penalties, and then a year after that you got penalties as well. So we only apply the penalties a bit like your power bill. If you haven't paid on that day, you've got you've got an incentive to pay a little bit sooner. Otherwise, you've got to pay a little bit more. So that's a little bit of the difference, and which is why you see more. Unfortunately, with the whole regime, it affected definitely Maori freehold land more. You saw penalties being applied in the 2019-20, which were from those aggressive and punitive penalty regimes, and we've stopped that. And now you can see with the approach that we're taking, it is actually it's more effective.
And final question on page 257, Sundry debt aid, and it's saying it's a comparison, but we're only seeing 24 figures, I think. Can someone also explain what the 5 million is on land, on roads and footpaths, or the total of this?
So that, so on page, as you say, 257, and I've just got to see 23 to this is 24, that might be, there is no comparative, so you're quite good spotting. What this is saying, what is the total debt that we, for Sundry invoices, which is not rates, as at the 31st of December, and it says it's 8.5. What that, for roads and footpaths, is basically our funding where we have to invoice for things from our CIP or in terms of the recovery, and so we put the invoices out to them, and as it's pointed out into the other, as part of that phasing, we expect to get it within the next month or so. So yeah, we raise it, and then that's the kind of the cost associated.
So there's nothing alarming there?
No, that it's due to, yeah.
Thank you.
Thanks, Councillor Olga. All good. Any other questions of clarification? If not, is someone willing to move the paper? Thank you, Councillor Robinson, seconded by Councillor Treasury. All in favour? Aye. Carried. Thank you, Julian. This brings us to the end of our public meeting. Thank you, everyone.